This is why it had to happen this way. Yes, this is why it had to happen this way. And if you've been asking why everything felt like chaos, you are exactly where you are meant to be. You thought it was falling apart, but what if it was falling into place? I see what you could not see. I stood where you could not stand. And I never once lost sight of your future, even when you lost hold of your stability. Stay with me, because I am about to show you why the confusion was controlled, why the collapse was calculated, and why the shaking was not the end but the beginning of alignment. You called it chaos because it did not follow your plan. You called it unfair because it did not honor your timeline. You called it painful because it touched what you love. But I need you to understand something deeply. Nothing in your life has ever been outside of my reach. When doors closed abruptly, when conversations shifted without warning, when the ground beneath your certainty began to tremble, I was not absent. I was orchestrating. What felt random to you was precise to me. What felt reckless was intentional. I did not allow confusion to torment you. I allowed it to transition you. If I had unfolded everything gently, you would have tried to preserve what I was dismantling. You would have patched what I was removing. You would have clung to what could not carry the weight of where I am taking you. So I allowed it to break loudly. I allowed it to end clearly. I allowed it to feel undeniable. Not because I delight in your discomfort, but because partial endings create permanent attachments. I needed you to know it was over so you would stop resurrecting what I have already buried. You see, when structures crumble, it exposes their foundation. The shaking revealed cracks you were ignoring. The instability showed you what was never truly secure. I was protecting you from building your future on something that could not survive the storm that is coming with your promotion. And yes, there is promotion attached to this pressure, but elevation requires solid ground. You asked me for growth, but growth requires pruning. You asked me for clarity, but clarity often arrives through contrast. You asked me to remove what was not for you, but removal rarely feels comfortable. So when the disruption came, you mistook my precision for punishment. Yet I was not punishing you. I was preserving you. Nothing was spiraling out of control. It was moving out of alignment. And I would rather disrupt your comfort than allow you to remain in a place that slowly diminishes your calling. What you experienced was not chaos. It was correction. Not destruction, but direction. And this is only the first layer of why it had to happen this way. And here is the part you did not want to hear. I had to remove what you were too attached to, because what you were holding onto was quietly holding you back. You called it love. You called it security. You called it "this is just who I am." But attachment can disguise itself as necessity, and comfort can disguise itself as calling. I watched you cling to people who were seasonal, to plans that were smaller than your potential, to identities that once fit but no longer matched who you are becoming. If I had simply whispered, "Let it go," you would have tightened your grip. So I allowed circumstances to loosen it for you. You were praying for expansion while trying to preserve limitation. You were asking me for more while negotiating with what was familiar. And because I know the depth of your heart, I also know how fiercely you love, how loyally you commit, how desperately you try to fix what is breaking. That is beautiful, but it can also trap you. There were relationships you would have endured forever, even if they slowly drained your strength. There were environments you would have tolerated indefinitely, even if they shrank your voice. There were versions of yourself you would have defended, even though you had already outgrown them. So I allowed separation. I allowed silence. I allowed certain things to fade without explanation. Not to wound you, but to free you. What felt like rejection was often release. What felt like abandonment was often protection. I saw conversations that would eventually turn corrosive. I saw opportunities that would have compromised your integrity. I saw the slow erosion that you could not detect because you were emotionally invested. And because I love you too much to let you slowly decay in comfort, I intervened through disruption. You wondered why it ended the way it did, why it could not have been gentler, why it had to hurt. But understand this: decisive endings prevent prolonged damage. If I had allowed it to linger, you would have kept hoping for a version of it that no longer existed. You would have kept trying to revive something that had already served its purpose. And in doing so, you would have delayed the very future you have been praying for. You were not losing something essential. You were shedding something outdated. And shedding is rarely painless, but it is always necessary for growth. The version of you that is emerging cannot carry the weight of old attachments. I am not stripping you of joy. I am stripping you of what limits your expansion. And even now, as you begin to see the distance between who you were and who you are becoming, you are starting to understand that the removal was not cruelty. It was preparation. And while you were grieving what was removed, you were also frustrated by what was postponed. But the delay was never denial. It was protection. You thought I was silent. You thought I was slow. You thought I had overlooked your urgency. Yet I was carefully adjusting timing you could not perceive. You measure readiness by desire. I measure readiness by alignment. And there were elements still forming behind the scenes that had to mature before they could safely enter your life. You saw the opportunity and assumed it was yours immediately. You saw the open door and assumed it was meant to be walked through now. But I see trajectories beyond moments. I see the ripple effect of decisions 5, 10, 20 steps ahead. And I knew that if I allowed certain things to accelerate, the consequences would have been heavier than you were prepared to carry. Some blessings given too early become burdens. Some doors opened too soon become traps disguised as favor. You were asking, why is this taking so long? While I was asking, are you ready for what comes with it? Because what you desire does not arrive alone. It carries responsibility, scrutiny, pressure, and visibility. And if I had handed it to you in your previous state, you would have celebrated the access but struggled under the weight. So I slowed the pace. I inserted pauses. I redirected timelines. Not to frustrate you, but to fortify you. There were conversations happening that you never heard. There were shifts occurring in hearts you never saw. There were dangers being removed from your path before you ever stepped into them. What you call delay, I call detailed arrangement. I was filtering out what could have harmed you, refining circumstances so that when the moment finally arrives, it will not collapse under pressure. You interpret speed as favor. But sometimes favor looks like restraint. Sometimes love looks like interruption. I would rather disappoint your schedule than allow devastation in your destiny. So when you felt stuck, you were actually being safeguarded. When you felt overlooked, you were actually being prepared. And as you look back, you will realize that what did not happen when you wanted it to was the very thing that preserved you from a deeper loss. And this unfolding, the removal, the delay, it is all connected. It is all intentional. And I am not finished explaining why it had to happen this way. Listen closely. The pressure you felt was not meant to crush you, it was meant to condition you. You thought you were being buried, but you were being bent. You asked me to lift you higher, to expand your influence, to increase your capacity, but elevation without endurance would have broken you. So I strengthened you in hidden places before I ever exposed you to visible promotion. What you interpreted as hardship was actually training. What you labeled as struggle was structure forming inside you. You wanted the platform, but I was preparing your posture. You wanted recognition, but I was refining your resilience. Because what I am leading you into will require steadiness when applause fades, clarity when criticism rises, and humility when success tempts you to forget the journey. And those qualities are not formed in comfort. They are forged in pressure. I allowed challenges to stretch you so your inner foundation would not crack under external weight. There were moments when you felt stretched beyond what you could manage. Situations that tested your patience. Conversations that exposed your triggers. Delays that confronted your insecurity. But every one of those moments revealed something in you that needed strengthening. I was not exposing your weakness to shame you. I was exposing it to transform you. You cannot conquer what you refuse to confront. So I allowed life to press against the fragile areas of your character, not to humiliate you, but to fortify you. You thought I was distant when you felt overwhelmed, but I was closer than ever, watching how you responded, how you grew, how you adapted. Growth does not always feel inspiring. Sometimes it feels exhausting. Sometimes it feels like losing confidence before gaining wisdom. But understand this: I would never elevate you into a space your spirit is not prepared to sustain. I care more about your longevity than your speed. I care more about your stability than your spotlight. The strength you now carry did not appear overnight. It formed in the quiet decisions to keep going, in the tears you wiped away when no one saw, in the prayers you whispered when your voice felt weak, in the discipline you practiced when quitting would have been easier. And now, even you can sense it, you are not who you were. You respond differently. You think differently. You endure differently. This is why it had to happen this way. Because if the blessing had arrived before the backbone, you would have celebrated briefly and then collapsed. But now, when the doors open, you will not just enter, you will remain. And that endurance is the evidence that the strengthening season was never a setback. It was preparation for permanence. And the door that closed so abruptly, the one you still replay in your mind, was not rejection, it was redirection. You stood there confused, questioning your worth, wondering if you had misheard me. But I did not close it because you were unqualified. I closed it because it was not aligned with who you are becoming. There is a difference between opportunity and assignment. Not every open door is meant for you, and not every closed one is a loss. You attached meaning to that door. You imagined the future it represented. You saw stability, validation, maybe even relief. But I saw limitation. I saw how staying there would have slowly silenced parts of you that are meant to be amplified. I saw how comfort would have replaced calling. And because I see the full picture, I intervened before you could settle into something smaller than your destiny. When it shut, you felt embarrassment. You felt doubt creeping in. You wondered if others were moving ahead while you were being left behind. But comparison is a distorted lens. You are not on their timeline, and they are not carrying your calling. The redirection was specific to you. I was adjusting your path, not punishing your effort. Sometimes I close doors loudly so you do not attempt to reopen them quietly. Because if it had remained slightly open, you would have kept trying. You would have negotiated, compromised, convinced yourself to accept less. But I refuse to let you build your life in a space that restricts your growth. So I sealed it. Firmly. Clearly. Finally. What you could not see then was the corridor forming beyond it. Redirection did not mean stagnation. It means recalibration. I was aligning you with environments that match your maturity, with connections that support your expansion, with assignments that stretch your gifts instead of suppressing them. The discomfort of transition is temporary. The alignment of purpose is lasting. You were not disqualified. You were being repositioned. And in time, you will see that the very door you mourned was too small for the version of you that is emerging. The redirection was not an accident. It was intentional guidance towards something that fits not just your desire, but your destiny. And this unfolding continues, because there is still more I need you to understand about why it had to happen this way. And even when you thought nothing was happening, when the silence felt heavy, when the stillness felt like abandonment, I was working in places you could not see. You measured progress by movement, by visible change, by immediate confirmation. But I measure transformation by depth, by unseen alignment, by conversations unfolding behind closed doors. Just because your eyes saw no shift did not mean my hands were idle. The quiet season was not emptiness. It was orchestration. You asked for signs, and I gave you stillness. You asked for clarity, and I gave you patience. You asked for breakthrough, and I gave you endurance. Not because I ignored your prayers, but because what I was building required roots before branches. If I had shown you every adjustment I was making, you would have tried to interfere. If I had revealed every obstacle I remove it, you would have worried about dangers that never reached you. So I allowed you to rest in partial knowledge while I handled complete reality. There were rooms where your name was spoken with respect when you assumed you were forgotten. There were hearts being softened toward you while you feared you had been misunderstood. There were opportunities forming quietly while you believed the moment had passed. I was shifting atmospheres, redirecting intentions, and tangling complications long before they surfaced. And because my work often happens beneath the surface, you mistook preparation for absence. The unseen season builds a different kind of faith. It teaches you to trust my character without demanding constant proof. It strengthens your inner confidence so that when visible change arrives, you are not dependent on applause for assurance. You learn to stand steady even when nothing seems to move. And that steadiness is power. If everything had happened quickly and publicly, you might have celebrated the outcome but missed the intimacy of trust. The waiting drew you closer. The silence sharpened your discernment. The uncertainty humbled you in ways immediate success never could. And now, when you look back at the days that felt empty, you will begin to notice subtle shifts that were quietly forming your future. Nothing was wasted. Not one tear. Not one delayed answer. Not one moment of stillness. I was weaving connections you could not trace and dismantling threats you never identified. The unseen work was precise and intentional, and the very quiet you resented became the foundation of the clarity you now carry. And now, as the pieces begin to settle and your perspective starts to widen, you are slowly realizing that this was alignment, not loss. What once felt like subtraction is revealing itself as refinement. What once felt like betrayal is showing itself as redirection. You are beginning to see that nothing was taken from you without purpose. Every ending created space. Every disruption recalibrated your direction. Every tear softened your pride and strengthened your compassion. You thought you were being stripped, but you were being shaped. You thought something precious was slipping through your hands, but I was removing what no longer fit the future I designed for you. Loss feels loud in the moment. Alignment feels subtle until time reveals its wisdom. And now you can sense it. You are lighter. There, more grounded. The desperation that once drove your decisions has softened into discernment. If everything had unfolded according to your original plan, you might have achieved something impressive but misaligned. You might have gained visibility but lost authenticity. You might have secured comfort but sacrificed calling. And because I see beyond immediate satisfaction, I intervened in ways that felt uncomfortable but preserved your long-term purpose. You are not behind. You are positioned. You are not disqualified. You are refined. The path may not look the way you imagined, but it now fits the version of you that has been strengthened through every season you questioned. What once seemed chaotic now reveals pattern. What once seemed unfair now reveals protection. And what once seemed like silence now reveals strategy. This is why it had to happen this way, not to harm you, not to delay you, not to diminish you, but to align you fully with the life that matches your growth. And as you step forward from this place, you will carry not just hope, but understanding. Not just faith, but perspective. Because the journey that confused you has now clarified you. And clarity is the final gift of alignment.